Okay. Okay. All righty. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. Happy Thursday. All right. Yes, not Friday. All right. Today is going to be a fun one because today we're going to be talking about celiac. We're going to be talking about bowel disorders. So hello on YouTube. Hello on Instagram. We're going to talk about what's going on, what it is, where does it come from. I'll try to keep this to about a half hour, so I'll go through my notes so I stay on time here. Yes, happy Friday Eve. I like that. I like that a lot. All right, so let's just jump right into it. Let's jump right into it. I'll cover everything at the end. Let's do it this way. So, if you haven't, I'm going to be doing a talk Tuesday night, which is May 2nd at 6 p.m. I'm going to be talking about opportunities to be working with, regenerative food. So if that's something you want to bring into your life, either to use or to share with other people, that's going to be an available opportunity. So if you want to get in touch with that, or involved with that, I should say, message me. I could send you the link. I'll post something on my story on Instagram. We could do something there. That's probably the big announcement. So other than that, let's get right into it because that's the most time sensitive one. So we're going to be talking about bowel disorders and celiac. So first we have to talk about the digestive tract in general a little bit. And more importantly, we have to talk about what is regeneration and reversing disease. So in my career, it's really been my goal to help really help others realize that they can regenerate because the body only knows how to do one thing. It knows how to heal. The question is, do we end up getting in our own way? Do we throw in a lot of acidity, toxins that just impair our ability to do that? So take it for what you will. That is kind of really what my goal is. It's not necessarily about looking at things like symptoms, or even what we call diseases or autoimmune diseases like celiac, because all that is a constellation of symptoms. And the question is, why is that happening? Just because you might have a genetic predisposition to something does not necessarily mean that it's going to activate. It's only activated through the lifestyle choices either we copy or mimic that our parents or family does, or it's something that we've kind of brought into our own life. And when we're talking about reversing disease and regeneration, there are really 5 things that are important. It's how well do you assimilate nutrients? Can you excrete waste? Are we able to allow the body to grow? Are we able to reproduce either as a species or at a cellular level? So from the micro all the way up to the macro. And then are we able to adapt? Our environment is always adapting. So it's assimilation of nutrients, excretion of waste, growth, reproduction, adaptation. Very simply put, if you are doing something that's going to improve one of those 5 things, you're on the road to regeneration. If you are not, if you are impairing one of those 5 things, you are on the way towards disease. Simply put, that's what it is. So any action you take that's going to support those is good, and anything that impairs them is going to be an issue. And the truth is, the body has an innate intelligence. Some call it intelligent design. I like intelligent design. We are able to regulate and heal ourselves. Now, I've talked about this before because this is going to also relate to celiac and bowel disorders. 97 to 90% of all illnesses, or what we call disease, are stress, toxicity, and acidity. 3 things. Stresses come in 3 flavors. We have physical, chemical, and emotional. And a lot of those fall under a lot of chemical stresses, particularly when we're talking about toxins and acidic foods and stuff. We'll get into that in a little bit. But also toxic emotions. So self-doubt's a big thing. There's a ton of different issues with that. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind. Now, we all inherit certain genetic traits, but again, genetics loads the gun. Lifestyle is what ends up pulling the trigger. So just because we inherit a certain gene does not necessarily mean that it's going to express itself. And even if it does, are there ways that we can reverse that? And it turns out that's what we're going to talk about. Now, your GI tract is really important. It's essentially the hub of your body. And this is what I love talking about with iridology, because if you look at an iris chart, you'll actually see that the digestive tract, the stomach, the intestines are essentially at the middle. And all the organs in the body essentially come off of that. Now, that might sound a little maybe ridiculous or esoteric if maybe you're new to this space, but we already know. You can look at books like Gut, where we already know things like the gut-brain connection exist, where we have links through the vagus nerve that can literally talk. There is a line of communication between the gut and the brain. We know the gut is the place where most of our dopamine and over 90% of our serotonin is actually produced. That is largely used outside of the gut, right? In our nervous system. So, if there is something wrong with the gut, it tends to affect other areas of the body. And like just a short list of like some of the side effects that can come from an inflammatory bowel disease. It could be something like malabsorption or starvation. Now, it might not be literal starvation. It could just be the starvation of cells because the gut is damaged. Gastritis, enteritis, any of your itises, your inflammation. Diverticulitis is a big one. Gas, diarrhea, constipation, parasites. What's going on, Doc? Nice to see you. Crohn's, different types of cancers of the GI tract. Colon cancer is I believe the fastest growing cancer at this point in at least America. Appendicitis, lymphatic congestion. Most of our lymphatic system is located right around that gut, our immune system. So when you hear lymphatic system, think immune system. They're almost one and the same. Nausea. When we're talking about inflammatory bowel disease in general or damage to the intestines, remember, inflammation means tissue damage. That's essentially what inflammation is a sign of, is that there is tissue damage. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, right? If I cut my finger, we're going to want inflammation to that area so it can clot, so it can bring more blood to the area so it can start to heal. But when it's kind of up and going for a very long period of time, it's going to be a big issue. So inflammatory bowel disease, we have really like two main flavors of that usually. It's really Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. Now, some of the symptoms that come along with that are usually diarrhea, abdominal cramps, fever, could have issues with the eyes, could be like muscle aches and pains or joints. Skin is usually a big thing. So if there is IBD, I see very often you have what we would call autoimmune issues. So psoriasis, eczema, skin breakouts are very common. Liver gallbladder congestion is a big one because it's going to affect our detoxification pathways. And a lot of that is usually kind of where this is going to come from. And remember, like, if you go the conventional route, it's usually one of two ways it's going to go. You're going to get some sort of anti-inflammatory drug, or you're going to get surgery. So so they don't, in the conventional model, they look at this and say, there's no way to treat it. There's nothing you can do. You either cut it or you just manage the symptoms with usually steroids or something of the like. And officially they will call it idiopathic. And idiopathic literally means I don't know. They don't know what's going on. And we're going to go over how that's not necessarily true. We're going to keep it as friendly as we can for the censors and such here. But we are going to go into some of the main reasons as we can here. So that's inflammatory bowel disease. You generally have two flavors. It's Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. Crohn's disease usually can happen anywhere in the intestines. It's usually in pockets. Ulcerative colitis is usually more located just in the colon, but they generally have similar. They lead to similar symptomology. I guess let's put it that way. Then we have diverticulitis. Now, a diverticulum is essentially a blind tube leading from a cavity or passage. So it's essentially like a dead end outpouching of the intestines. So it's an outpouching of the mucosa, the lining of the colon, and it essentially the muscle of the colon starts to weaken and it balloons. So what can happen is it could lead to some issues. Itis means inflammation. So diverticulitis, you're going to have inflammation of a diverticula. Now, again, so it's an inflammation of an outpatching, usually of the colon. Diverticulosis is when essentially you have diverticula within the colon. So where do we notice this? Where is diverticulosis becoming an issue? It's usually going to be in areas where there's low fiber intake, where there's high red meat consumption, where there's a lot of processed foods. Places where it's most common are the US and Australia. That is not surprising given kind of what I'm saying. And areas that are less prone to this include places like most of Asia and Africa. They tend to include more fiber-rich foods, more plants and vegetables, thus usually see fewer outbreaks of diverticulitis. Conventional treatment, again, if you go that route, usually are antibiotics or steroids or surgery. Now, again, why is fiber important? If you think of the digestive tract, it's effectively like a muscle, and it pushes things along, especially the small intestine. It'll push things along from time every 90 minutes or so. Usually we have a peristalsis. It's called peristalsis. It's a peristaltic wave that pushes things forward. Now in the colon, that doesn't necessarily happen the same way, but there is a muscular tone, and that's sort of set from the nervous system like the vagus nerve. So, and if that's weakened, or if that message is not as strong as it should be, it could lead to weakening of the muscles in that area, and that could lead to some real big time issues. So having something that can push this along, this is one of the reasons why fiber is so important, because it will help push those things along. So we went over diverticulitis, we went over inflammatory bowel disease. Now we have to go over celiac quick. So celiac, and again, this is according to the Clinic and Experimental Gastroenterology, so it's a journal. Celiac disease is an autoimmune disorder that can occur in genetically predisposed people where the ingestion of gluten leads to the damage in the small intestine. Well, there is damage, but is it autoimmune? Do we know what's going on? Here's what we're going to have to kind of break down. Now, what's actually happening is in the small intestine, we have these little projections. They kind of look like fingers. They're called villi. And on the villi, there's actually microvilli. And these are really where nutrients are absorbed through these villi into the bloodstream so that they can be utilized in the body, right? But what happens is when the villi get damaged, they cannot absorb nutrients properly. Now, it's estimated that like 1 in 100 people worldwide have celiac disease. Roughly 2.5 million Americans are probably undiagnosed. So what's happening here is we have gluten, right? Gluten's the big thing in celiac disease that causes the issue, supposedly. So gluten is a protein, essentially. It is a protein. And when gluten cannot be broken down into the amino acids, and remember the point of digestion, we go back to the phases, the 5 keys of health. Assimilation of nutrients is number 1. So can we break down proteins into amino acids? If we cannot do that, that is going to lead to some issues. Gluten is one of those proteins that should be broken down into amino acids, because we can only absorb and utilize fatty acids, simple sugars like glucose and fructose, and amino acids. So we cannot digest whole proteins. If whole proteins are starting to make their way through the digestive tract, that's going to trigger an immune response. And that's essentially what's happening in celiac disease. So these gluten proteins are not totally broken down in the intestine. Because there is leaky gut, these holes are a little bit wider and more open than they should be. They open up. Larger undigested proteins can get through, like gluten. And what happens is it stimulates a response from the immune system. And again, where is most of our immune system located? It's in lymphatic tissue that is right around the gut lining. Usually this is done by T cells. The body recognizes these peptides and they consider it an antigen, and it initiates an immune response. And now you start getting damage to some of the intestinal lining. So as far as the mechanism, as far as what's happening, that is kind of what's known. Now, the real question is, why are some people having an issue with this and not others? And again, we're going to get into the reasons in a little bit, but ultimately that's what's happening. We're getting undigested proteins like gluten that are able to make their way through the gut lining. It initiates an immune response, leads to inflammation. Now we have some real issues when it comes to celiac disease. That's when we're getting some of the symptoms associated with it. So I mentioned this a couple times. We have to talk about, again, this gut-brain connection, which is what we call actually the enteric nervous system, or the second brain. Now, this consists of neurons that are embedded along the gut. So we actually have neurons that are connected to the gut lining. Estimated it contains somewhere between like 100 million neurons, and then more than either the spinal cord or the peripheral nervous system. So there's actually more nerves connected to the gut than our peripheral nervous system. So that's all our muscles, all our extremities. We have more of that in the gut. And they help play a role in breaking down food, absorbing nutrients, expelling wastes. 90% of the fibers from this enteric nervous system from the primary visceral nerve, which is the vagus nerve, carry information from the gut to the brain. So 90% of it is sensory information. So it's telling 90% of these 100 million neurons are just sending signals to the brain as far as what to do. The enteric nervous system itself uses more than 30 neurotransmitters, just like the brain. And we know that 95% of the body's serotonin, about 50%, a little bit more of dopamine is actually found in the intestines, in the bowels. That's actually where this is created. So what are some of the most common symptoms that we see when we're talking about celiac disease? Well, in kids, usually you'll see abdominal pain and bloating, chronic diarrhea, vomiting, constipation. You might have pale, foul-smelling stools or fatty stools, which is undigested fat. You might have weight loss. You might have inability to thrive. You might have ADHD, fatigue. You might have dental enamel defects. There's a lot of things that could come on. Delayed growth and delayed puberty. In adults, you might have an unexplained iron deficiency anemia, fatigue, bone or joint pain, arthritis or osteoporosis, depression or anxiety, skin rashes. You might get numbness and tingling in the hands and feet. You might get seizures and migraines. You might have experience infertility or bouts of it, or you might miss your menstrual period occasionally. You could be more prone to things like canker sores. Now, long term, obviously, we're talking about then issues with miscarriage, again, iron deficiency anemia, malabsorption, which is, again, step one, so vitamin and mineral deficiencies, pancreas insufficiency because our digestive tract is not functioning as well as it should, gallbladder issues, lymphomas, and other cancers, because, again, that's where most of our immune system is. It's through the lymphatic system. Neurological issues, because our nervous system has so many endings in the gut. You're talking about potential dementia, migraines, neuropathy, myopathy, muscle pain, seizures potentially, because of all of this there. And And when we're talking about conventional treatment, the best they can tell you is, hey, you have to go on a strict gluten-free diet for indefinitely. That's about it. That's kind of where it's going to end as far as what you're going to get out of it. So that's not very reassuring, right? That's not very reassuring as far as that can go. And then they give you the genetic argument, right? So the genetics, they'll say, oh, well, I was born with celiac disease. There's nothing I can do about it. Well, again, if you look at this Journal of Clinical and Experimental Gastroenterology, they might have something else to say here. So when they even count for all the genetic factors that we're aware of, there are two main genes that are a part of it that are present in 30 to 35% of all Caucasians. Of that group, only 2 to 5% will develop celiac disease. And they actually say that this literally means they're just pulling at straws. So less than 10%, they can tell you it's a genetic issue. At best, even when combining all of the known factors, they attribute less than 10% of celiac diseases being of genetic origin. This is grasping at straws. This is, we don't know what's going on. We're going to say it's genetic because it sounds better than saying, I don't know. That is effectively what's going on. No, we have some real issues as far as what is going on in the environment that's playing a role and that is really causing issues here. And you can look back into this if you'd like. You can go back and look at some of this stuff we're going to talk about and see when this stuff started blowing up. And the first one we got to talk about is pesticides. These things are sprayed on everything. There's a scientist that wrote back in 2012, Don Huber, and this is in reference to glyphosate. I have a quote here. Historians may look back and write about how willing we are to sacrifice our children and jeopardize future generations with a massive experiment that is based on false promises and flawed science just to benefit the bottom line of a commercial enterprise. Now, this is in reference to glyphosate, but you can use this reference for a few different things if you really wanted to. We know, there are already studies on this. So back in, 2013, they were finding glyphosate in mom's breast milk. So if you were consuming the conventional grains, they're actually finding glyphosate in the breast milk of moms, which is wild. We know that glyphosate has been found in urine and drinking water, and in America. We also know that it's found at 10 times higher than those tested in EU back in 2013. It's also given out at levels that are much higher than what is deemed safe right now. This is something that if you're consuming conventional produce, if you're consuming meat that is conventionally raised, because you have to realize these animals, there was something done on BT toxins a while ago, and it was initially used on corn. And this corn was used to feed a lot of cows that eventually were slaughtered and turned into steaks. What they found was that this BT toxin actually survived. The cow would eat the corn in the feed. The BT toxin would survive that. It would then end up on your dinner plate, so it survives the cooking process. The mom would consume it, and it would survive the mom's digestion, and turns out that it would also survive crossing a placenta, so that babies, these moms who were birthing these babies, you could look into this BT toxin, were actually being born with BT toxin in their system without ever consuming anything, just through the mom. This is one pesticide that we know about. These are always used in combination with others. And we walk around wondering like why there are issues. I had a friend reach out to me today who was visiting Italy. But if I had like a nickel for every time I heard this story, and I'm sure you know someone too who might be gluten sensitive or maybe even has celiac disease. They're from America. They're American citizens. They go to, you know, wherever they want. They go to Europe somewhere. They go to France. They go to Italy, whatever. And they eat all the pasta. They eat all the pizza they want. And they're like, oh man, I had no digestive symptoms on the entire trip. And I had pizza every day. And I had pasta every day. Whatever it is. Over and over again, I hear this story. Like at some point, we have to start putting this stuff together and realize what we're putting on our food is becoming a real issue. Then we have Dr. Stephanie Seneff. So if you haven't looked at some of her research, she's finding that imbalances in the gut, especially with celiac disease, impairs cytochrome P450, which is one of our main detoxifying enzymes we find in the liver. So it causes issues with detoxification, issues with utilizing things like vitamin D, vitamin A, producing enough bile. These are huge issues. So we have to understand that this stuff isn't happening. Stephanie Seneff, Seneff. That's how you spell her last name. We have to stop thinking like this stuff is, it's bad luck or bad genes or you rolled, it's just you rolled the dice the wrong way. That's not what's happening. It's an environmental thing that is a major issue. And if we don't take active steps towards fixing it, we're going to have some issues. So if we're consuming things that are laced with glyphosate and other pesticides, if we're exposing ourselves on a regular basis to heavy metals, either through injections or something else, or metal fillings, or antibiotics all the time, going to be an issue. If we're dehydrating our body, consuming a lot of acidic foods all the time, meat, dairy, refined grains, this is going to lead to an acidic environment. It's going to leave you dehydrated because dehydration isn't necessarily a water intake issue. It is a electrolyte imbalance. EMFs, other environmental pollutants, processed foods, medications, all of these are going to be big issues. So the first step is to deal with these stressors, those physical, chemical, emotional stressors that are in our control, and minimizing our exposure to them as much as possible. That's step one. Step two, if you're consuming GMO or glyphosate sprayed foods or packaged or processed foods or a lot of meat, especially if it's not organic, things labeled natural or all natural are usually just nonsense. So you have to make sure you're doing the best you can when you can source it. I understand it's more expensive, but I promise you, the medical bill on the back end is going to be more expensive, and it's usually they're going to give you an answer like there's nothing you can do, there's no answer, and you're going to come back to this anyway. So you might as well get in front of this as best you can. So you have to get rid of these. Why? Because these disrupt the gut and the flora in the gut, that microbiome. And what does this do? It helps us digest and absorb carbohydrates, especially in fats. It actually produces vitamins. So I don't think people know this. Everyone's worried about vitamins like K2 or certain B vitamins. We actually have microbes that produce these for us if it's actually a healthy environment. It helps us absorb minerals. It helps us eliminate toxins. It actually helps train our immune system. So our gut microbes, and remember, we're outnumbered 10-1 by gut microbes to human cells. It actually helps train our immune system to understand what is an appropriate response. So it is incredible the amount that this is able to do. Whoops. I think we're good here. So if you happen to be struggling from one of these inflammatory disorders or celiac disease, gotta get rid of the stressors, gotta get on an organic, plant-based approach as best you can, because this is what we're going to do to start healing. Now, if there is some sort of IBD going on, juicing is huge. So, carrots, celery, beets, watercress, cilantro, parsley, lemon, juices are going to be huge. Why? Because juicing is essentially it's kind of a hack through the digestive tract. That kind of rhymed. Because you'll start absorbing some of this stuff more easily. Apples, grapes, all of these are fantastic because you can get these healing compounds in more efficiently. There are herbs that are fantastic for this too, for helping heal the digestive tract, right? So we have marshmallow, we have comfrey, we have slippery elm, aloe. All of these are fantastic to start helping heal that digestive tract. So you have to start with that, because if there's damage with IBD, you're going to have issues absorbing it. So we have to start at the easiest level possible and take some of that stress off. Then we have to talk about optimizing the gut flora. So again, juicing those vegetables, blending fruits. Fruits are incredibly healing and astringent, and they're going to give you not only the electrolytes you need, but the vitamins and minerals you need to actually start healing the gut lining. And also provide the fiber to actually help start regaining, say, if there's diverticuli, the muscular contraction that you need to help move food along as well as possible. You definitely want to check on your detoxification pathways. So glutathione, really important. That's going to be sulfur-rich compounds with garlic and onion and cruciferous vegetables. So your arugula and broccoli and collard greens. All of those are going to be great. Binders are actually going to be really good too. Things that are going to be really healing or can help get some of the stuff out. So I was talking about zeolites earlier, but chlorella, spirulina, there are some of my favorites to help not only bring in some of the vitamins, minerals, amino acids, essential fatty acids you need, the chlorophyll you need, the micronutrients you need, but these are going to be huge on a daily basis. So spirulina and chlorella, really, really fantastic stuff. We have to get out of this idea that, disease is just a constellation of symptoms. What disease actually is a natural process experienced in the body when we are either too acidic or too toxic. And this comes in the form of, excess mucus from things we're taking in. Could be injections, could be metals, could be chemicals like pesticides, could be pollutants. And then it results in inflammation, your itises, in different areas. So the goal is really to kind of clean this stuff out as best as possible. That is really the way that we have to go, and that would be where you would start. As far as, what I use, that's kind of how I go about it. I also love making sure, again, that we're using 100% organic foods as often as we can. That's why the companies that I work with are 100% organic. Everything's grown in regenerative soil. So we're getting the highest caliber nutrition we can, the most nutrient dense that we could possibly get. There's absolutely no pesticides used. So we're not dealing with any of the issues here from glyphosate or from BT toxin or anything else that we're spraying on our food on a regular basis. So we can get the nutrition we need on a regular basis to at least start with that, to build the foundation so that we can start healing. And there is a way out of this. And this is why I work with the companies I do, because I truly believe this. There's a micro aspect, which in my case would be working one-on-one with someone. But then there's a macro aspect, which is we're seeing the health of the planet slowly degrade, coincide essentially with the health of human beings. And that is not an accident. So if we don't get on top of this and actually vote with our dollars on a daily basis for different things, for, a better way to go about this, for healthier food choices, and start. And if enough individuals do this, we can actually make a huge difference. And I think there's 5 things that if enough individuals stand up and just start acting on this, we can see some real change. Now, the first is obviously the food system itself, and I just talked about it. So healthy farming practices, we really need to start regenerating our soil. That somewhere like only 1% of our soils are nutrient dense. We got to get rid of the CAFOs, the concentrated feeding operations, monocropping, the subsidies that are subsidizing these poor practices, these very destructive, not only on human health, but the planet's health. We're so worried about things like climate change. These are the things that are actually causing it. If we're destroying the soil, if we're destroying the stuff that gives life to plants and to us, then we're missing the big picture here. We need to clean up the health system. So we need to get over this idea of synthetic vitamins or injecting your health, and you could fill in that blank with however you want. Using a pharmaceutical for every symptom, even though every pharmaceutical comes with negatives. Is there a place for it? Sure. Can it save your life potentially? Sure. But it's completely overused and ends up making a lot more things worse than they generally are, especially when your answer is, oh, I don't know, here, take a steroid. Environmental. So again, are we actually changing or improving the health of the soil, air, and water? I can tell you here in America, we tend to be putting more garbage in it. There's a reason why if you go hundreds of miles east and west of the Mississippi River, it's called the cancer belt in this country because of runoff from things like glyphosate in the Mississippi River. Politics. Listen, it really doesn't matter which side of the aisle you fall on, because where these subsidies are coming from are from government officials who are bought off on both sides of the aisle. So, if we're not going to clean this up, it's going to be a huge, huge issue. And again, we have to vote for people who are going to do this, or we do it ourselves. We have to take it out of our hands. That is ultimately my mission. And then the infrastructure. So where is this money going? Is it going into clean water, to organic farming? Is the government trying to scare us, or actually trying to use our funds to make our country a better place to live? These are questions we need to ask ourselves. So, if we can do those 5 things, if enough people can start acting in a way and moving in that direction, we've got ourselves into this situation, which means we can get ourselves out. And it starts with you, with me, with being an example for other people. That's ultimately the best way you can go about it. So if, you can stand up and do something about it, even something little, it goes a long way. And I promise what you do, other people are watching. So if you can inspire someone else, that's only going to lead to a trickle-down effect down the road. So that's what I got for today. That is inflammatory bowel disease, that is celiac disease, and that is how we save the planet, I guess. So there was a third topic at the end. But thank you for tuning in. If you want to work with me or explore using some of the stuff I use, or try to get to the bottom of some of this stuff yourself, schedule a 15-minute call with me. It's free. You could use the link in my bio. And we could talk about getting started, what this is like to regenerate, to heal, because suffering is optional. It is not something that you need to do. I know you're told a lot. Either from your doctor or from your politicians or whatever. It seems like only here that we're told that, we have to take a pill to fix something. And no, the body only knows how to heal. So if you can do it, if you're open to it, if you're not opposed to being the change in your community, in your family, in your friends group, this is how you get started. So thank you for tuning in. You can check it out, like I said, in my bio. I'll see you guys next week. Adios.